So I think the number one thing I would say is, and this is so easier said than done, but it's to be kind to yourself. Like if you have, a child yourself, or you have a niece or nephew and they fell over, you wouldn't just kind of go, oh, get back up. You would lovingly go and pick them back up and make sure they're okay. So it's that reminder to do that for yourself, because part of you is hurting. And so rather than push yourself through it, it's to recognize that, do you know what, I'm hurting. And that's totally understandable that I am. And if you're struggling to acknowledge that, that's where I would say go speak to people that have come out the other side of grief, because they're the best people to be able to reassure you of where you are in your journey.
Welcome to the GenX Shift podcast, a show for Gen Xers who are navigating some pretty tough transitions and aren't sure how to move forward. I'm your host, Michelle Walter, proud Gen Xer, former lawyer turned entrepreneur, huge Jason Momoa fan, and margarita snob. And I've navigated a lot of transitions in my life, from losing my mom suddenly to a heart attack to starting my own business. But I often did it all on my own because I was too stubborn to ask for help. Now I'm on a mission to give actionable strategies to other Gen Xers so that they can find the confidence, courage, and clarity they need to make a shift. So let's rock and roll. Hey, Gen Xers, welcome back to the podcast. This week, I'm excited to bring you part 2 of my powerful conversation with my dear friend and fellow coach, Christina Lord. If you haven't already listened to the first part that I did with Christina, please go back and listen to last week's episode, where she shares her journey through grieving the loss of her mom 12 years ago, and then the loss of her dad more recently. She has a really powerful story to share about how she navigated through those, the impact of losing a parent. And now in part 2, we're going to talk about how Christina actually moved through that grief. We really get into the powerful invitation of turning toward and leaning into our grief, of giving that grief a space, a place that it deserves in our life. Because when we can learn to turn toward that grief, it doesn't mean that it takes us over and that we'll never come out of it. What it means is that we're able to move through it and open up to the beauty of what it means to be a human, open up to the eventual gifts that we can see through our grieving process. Christina takes us through some practical practices, some tips that she used to help her move through that grief. And I hope that you're able to walk away from this episode with a sense of how we can take care of ourselves as we're grieving the loss of a parent. We have to be able to return, as Christina talks about, to some of these fundamental needs that we have, like getting sufficient sleep, eating properly, moving our body, spending time with people. And in order to do that, she shares some supportive practices that she learned to help bring her out of, as she calls it, her pit of shit. So I hope that this conversation nourishes you and helps you move through the identity shift that so many of us experience when we lose a parent. Moving from the identity of being a child, maybe being a caregiver for our parent, whatever kind of identity shift is present for you in losing your parent, I think this conversation is bound to give you some powerful nuggets of wisdom. So sit back and enjoy this conversation in part 2 with Christina Lord. All right. Thanks for coming back, Christina. I so appreciate you carving out the time to dive into this conversation a little bit more, because I'm going to link in the show notes the first episode that we did where you talk so beautifully about the death of your mom and then the death of your dad later. And we covered a lot of grief in that last discussion. And I think we want to pick up, because I really want to give folks some hope, some practices, some digestible nuggets of things that they can do for themselves to support themselves through the grieving and healing process of losing a parent. And so I encourage everyone to go back and listen to our first episode before they dive into this one, so that they can get some of your backstory But yeah, I'm just so grateful that you carved out the time to do this again with us.
Absolutely. Anything for you, Michelle.
Yeah, likewise, likewise. So I'm going to just recap a little bit because I think where we left off in the previous episode was you were talking about the grieving that you were experiencing over the loss of your dad and how that was also bringing up, of course, unhealed grief around the loss of your mom several years before. And I know that we had talked offline about how most of last year you were in what you call your pit of shit, which is a phrase I have started to borrow because I absolutely love it. And so I want to give folks a sense of, first of all, what that pit of shit was like for you. Really paint us that picture, and then tell us what you started to do to heal your way out of that pit of shit.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Yes. I will start by saying that the double-edged sword in the work that we do is that we have trained in the theory of these things, right? As to how to kind of regulate your emotions, mindset. And, I very much at the time thought, well, no, I've got this. I've totally got this. I mean, I'm struggling, but of course I'm struggling. And I think from where we left off, it was that underestimating just how much bigger grief can be. And not only that, bigger, but multifaceted. So we talked about, I think, almost the backing up of the train, the grief train, because my dad's passing didn't only remind me and bring up grief from losing my mum 12 years before. It also brought up a number of other losses, because we tend to think of grief as being, losing a loved one. And I think it's important to recognize that actually grief can come in several different forms. And I think it was that, I guess the radiance of it, but the depth of it, actually, it ended up being almost this aftermath of accumulation of a number of losses that really started to rock my identity. And, for anybody listening who's maybe in this place or has recently gone through a life-changing situation, normally we can weather the storm if we've got a few things to anchor onto. When we think about the wheel of life, which a lot of coaches use, if you've got a few areas in there that are okay, then you can really manage that better. But I think if you've got a number of areas on that wheel that are shaky at best, yeah, that's when things can get darker more quickly, for sure. Yeah.
I want to seize on something you said there that just went off like a light bulb when I heard you say it, is the identity piece. And I think one of the important points to drive home for folks is that, as you said, we grieve a lot of different losses, whether it's the loss of a job, loss of physical health, loss of a loved one, loss of friendships, loss of a marriage, whatever kind of loss it is that we experience. There's always grief in that. It could even be loss of just moving on from a previous phase of life, right? And I don't think in this country, and when I say this country, I'm kind of lumping US and England, all the Western countries together, basically.
Yeah.
I don't think we deal with that kind of loss well at all. We're not encouraged to do that. And so what really hit me as you were talking about that is the identity piece, because in any of those losses, it seems like sort of at the root, what we're grieving is some loss of identity that we had attached to that particular person, situation, job, relationship, outward appearance, whatever it might be. And so I think for people to really understand and get curious about how their identity has changed in the presence of this loss. And so how is the grief showing up in that identity evolving, which can be very challenging and discombobulating for folks.
Oh, hugely. And yeah, I think it was really good that you kind of dove into that specifically, because I would say that that was my number one reason why I went downhill so quickly. Um, I was coping, just trying to push through. But my grief rose up to kind of say that no, you need to stop and allow yourself to process a lot of this pain that you're feeling. And a lot of it was irrational. But to your point, when you think about your identity of being a daughter, a sibling, a partner, a particular role at work, a pet owner, like name your label. With that label becomes a lot of meaning, becomes a lot of narrative, becomes a lot of emotion. And if that then is taken away, then a part of you feel like has been taken away. That who am I if I'm not a daughter anymore? You know? And so it's my sister kind of described it as almost feeling untethered. Like she used to, like a balloon, was kind of tethered to something. And then that kind of got dislodged. And then she was just like flailing around of like, where do I belong? Because we all, in our essence, want to feel that we return to somewhere where we have that history, we have that, you go back to seek comfort. And I think if you feel like that has been wiped away, then yeah, it can feel really discombobulating. And we've talked about this before also, that we're all the ages we've ever been. So even like little Christina still lives in here, who wants her dad. But all of the other Christinas that have ever been are all part of, who I am today. And I do feel that in retrospect that it kind of was that brutal beauty in the falling apart, so that you could create more light in to realize that as you move through the stages of grief, to get more acceptance of how lucky I was to have all of the love that I've had, but not to speed through it, but just to sit with the fact that I was grieving so much meant that I loved so much. And that's the dichotomy, I think, for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the deeper the wound, sometimes the deeper the tribute is the only word that's coming to mind of what the relationship was like. And tribute doesn't necessarily mean exalted. It could mean it was a very challenging relationship. So there's a lot of very complicating factors when we're talking about that deep wound. And one of the things with identity that I want to point out, especially recognizing that this audience is mostly Gen Xers, a lot of Gen Xers are at the stage right now, like you were doing, caring for their parents, either just as their parents get older or caring for parents through dementia or disease, whatever it might be. And so the loss of the caregiver identity is a really big shift for folks, especially at this age. I know that was something I witnessed in my mom when her dad, my Papa Norman, passed away. She had spent so much of her life after her mom had passed away first, caring for her dad. And I think I never got to talk to my mom about this, but I think that her identity was so wrapped up in being her daddy's daughter, his caregiver, that when he died, the ground was taken out from underneath her. And the only identity she had was as our mom, essentially, and as an office mommy. So all of that's to say, I think for Gen Xers who are in that caregiving place, and I'm going to have a guest on the podcast who's actually a coach for caregivers of people with dementia. So right. I think the wisdom here is to recognize that in your current role as a caregiver, if you're caregiving for your parents or anyone else in your life, quite honestly, to understand how important it is to get support during that caregiving process, because there's going to come a time when that identity of caregiver is rocked, and when it is, also get support. So tell us a little bit about how well, I want to extend an invitation for people, because what I hear and what you're saying is that you, I think like me, there's a real willingness to sit in the pit of shit, to sit in the grief, to sit in the darkness, because we know how to navigate through it. We know how to create space for it, but a lot of people don't. And for
Yeah.
a lot of people, sitting in that grief, in that darkness is really fucking terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
So what could you tell somebody first, just to start out in the process before we get to some of the more of the practices that you use, but starting out in that process of how does somebody learn to turn toward and give space and just be in that grief?
Yeah, no, I think that's a powerful thing to recognize. It is difficult to feel your feelings, right? The healing is in the feeling. And I think GenXers of our generation, we have been taught to, like we've mentioned before, to just keep being busy and to distract yourself or numb yourself because it's just too painful. And I think there's a lot of fear around feeling like grief is going to swallow you whole. And I think it does feel like that sometimes. And I think there's also that, you know, if this is your first experience of grief, then I remember feeling like I was going insane. Like I thought that there was something psychologically wrong with me. And it was only when I started to tap into other resources and talk to other people that I was validated to say, no, this is part of grief. So I think when you first, that's one of the early things I would say is one, recognize that you're not losing the plot. You're not, there's not anything psychologically wrong with you. You are grieving. And grieving is such a complicated blend of emotions that it needs to be given respect and space to be able to process that. So I think the number one thing I would say is, and this is so easier said than done, but it's to be kind to yourself. You know, we just mentioned about your inner child. Like if you have, a child yourself, or you have a niece or nephew and they fell over, you wouldn't just kind of go, oh, get back up. You would lovingly go and pick them back up and make sure they're okay. So it's that reminder to do that for yourself, because part of you is hurting. And so rather than push yourself through it, it's to recognize that, do you know what, I'm hurting. And that's totally understandable that I am. And if you're struggling to acknowledge that, that's where I would say go speak to people that have come out the other side of grief, because they're the best people to be able to reassure you of where you are in your journey. So I think that's number one for sure. The second thing I would say is actually a little bit more using your senses. So I think when we naturally feel low, to get that balance right of being able to give ourselves comfort. So it may be, putting things against your skin that feel comforting. Because often when we are kind of feeling grieving, and depending obviously what temperature you're living in, but it's to do something that, okay, what would feel more comfortable to me now? Do I need to kind of wrap myself up? Do I need to, have some contact with a pet or with a person? Sometimes we can isolate ourselves when actually I think we just want somebody to hug us or hold our hand, or just to sit with us, to feel that presence of another person. Kind of just, it is almost this kind of self-soothing, but this co-regulation that we can have with other beings, be it four-legged or two-legged.
Yeah. I slept with my childhood teddy bear for a little while after Mom passed away, because there was something about my childhood teddy bear, which I still have, that was just very comforting to that inner child in me that just wanted to snuggle with my teddy bear, because that helped take away some of my sadness when I was little.
Yeah, absolutely. And that there's no shame. I think a lot of the time it's like, oh, I should be over this by now. Oh, well, I should just, this happens to everybody. And we tend to rationalize. We get all up in our head and we forget to give ourselves this grace and space of healing time, of, when you lose a loved one, you lose a part of your identity, like we've said. And it hugely resonated, by the way. My huge part of my identity became that I was a carer for my dad. And when that went away, my purpose kind of went, or a huge part, and it left a hole. It left a big gap, and I was lost because that was my day to day, like going to the hospital every day, seeing what he needed and talking to doctors and nurses and, all of the things that go with that. So, and I think a lot of the time because we can battle through, because we can default into our coping mechanisms, we can fool ourselves for a long time that we're okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing I will add is to be radically honest with yourself. And really, there's kind of radical honesty on one side and radical acceptance on the other. It's like they're the two that I would say are pivotal to help you navigate through your grieving process, because it is not easy. I remember someone saying to me, well, God, if you break your leg, you don't try and get up and walk on it. You go get attention, you go get help. They put it in a cast. They say, don't walk on it for a period of time. And because grief is unseen, it's all going on in here, we look like we're okay. And so we fool ourselves into thinking that we should be okay, when actually we're not. We're doing inner healing. And there's no time frame. Everybody's is different, depending on your relationship that you had with, the person that you've lost.
Yeah, I want to come back to something you said, because it sort of made me laugh inside when you were talking about, if you have a kid or a niece or nephew who falls down, and even if you're somebody who has a broken leg, we know that there are Gen Xers, because our parents did this to us. Like, if we did fall down, it's like, get up, quit your crying, dust yourself off. And
Yes.
so that's sort of the mentality we have. And so I can hear a lot of people saying, I don't baby my kid or my niece or my nephew when they fall down. I tell them to get back up and try again.
Yeah.
And there are people who will not go to the hospital for a broken leg. They will hobble around forever until they really have to go. And so the message, I think, with both of those examples is that messaging, that conditioning that we got, that you need to suck it up, dust yourself off. What we actually know now is that self-compassion, what you're talking about, being kind to yourself, from thousands of studies, we know that that's what actually builds resilience. Because to build on those visuals, if you get a kid who falls down, skins their knee, and you're like, just dust yourself off, you'll be fine. Like, put some dirt on the blood, like it'll be fine. Or the person who breaks their leg and they don't go to the doctor. The problem is that wound never properly heals because it hasn't gotten the care. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with tending to that wound so that it can actually heal, because otherwise you're going to be hobbling around with a janky leg that you never got set properly because you were too tough to go to the doctor. Right. So
yeah. It is absolutely true. And I know we said last time, my acronym for pain is pay attention inside now.
Yeah.
And to your point, I think if you don't tend to the wound, much like you don't tend to a pain, it generally will get worse. And it's getting worse because it's trying to tell you. It's trying to tell you what it needs. And if you keep ignoring what it needs, then yeah, expect the pain to get worse, and that's why people get more desperate. And then you can really go down into this pit of shit, as I call it. And I think I would say that the longer you try and run from it, the deeper, when it does catch up with you, because it will, you can try and outrun it. in fact, well, I don't know whether my sister will watch this back, but maybe she will. We had very different experiences of our grief in terms of different timings, because, when you talk about identity and what you've got going on in your life, she has a busy job in finance, a husband, two daughters. Life's busy. And for the longest time, she now says, "Oh yeah, I didn't have time. I didn't have time, because I needed to show up for work. I had stuff to do. And my life just couldn't go on hold, for God's sake, And so when I was very downhill, she, as my older sister, was like my stoic kind of guide. And I think initially, she was a little bit taken aback by my reaction and where I was at. And it's not until fast forward until now, when we're reflecting on it, that it's because it left such a hole, because I didn't have the distractions of a partner, children, and even a full-time job, because I'm self-employed. So our worlds were incredibly different, which is another reminder why we cannot compare our grief journey with anybody else's. I mean, we shouldn't compare ourselves to anyone anyway, which is, as we know, but especially your grief journey, you should kind of go, well, no, what is my experience? What's coming up for me? And be able to be that radical honest with yourself. And even if some people maybe don't understand it, then that shouldn't diminish what you're feeling.
Yeah.
Because it's true for you.
As you were talking about your sister, and everybody is different, for sure. And the visual that came to my mind is that the people who don't, for a variety of reasons, and we have to recognize the role that trauma plays in preventing us from wanting to turn to our grief. So there's kind of this cyclic, toxic concoction that's going on. And if you're someone who thinks, I don't have time to grieve, I got to get back to work, they can't live without me, my kids can't live without me, I can't take time for myself to grieve. In my mind, that's like taking a blanket and cutting one end off of it and sewing it on the other end, thinking that you're making it longer. Not taking that time is going to catch up with you at the end. And to be crystal clear about this, I hold my mom up as that example, because she did not take time for herself. She worked 3 jobs, took care of everybody else. She didn't eat healthy. She didn't sleep well. She didn't exercise, none of those things. She didn't take really time to grieve when her dad passed away, except for maybe a week or two, and then was right back at work with all the distractions, as you say. It caught up with her. Yeah. And I know that can be kind of a Debbie Downer or terrifying for people to hear. Yeah. I want people to have their eyes opened, because the time that my mom did not take to properly grieve her mom and her dad is time that was now stolen from my brother and me. So
it's that saying, if you don't take time for your health, then you better make time for your illness.
Yeah, that's powerful. Yeah. So tell me about that. We've really pepped people up with how exciting it is to turn towards your grief.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. Yeah. The only way out is through, people. Sorry.
I know. Sorry. No, no hacks. Sort of God.
If there's no tips, no top tips. Well, no top tips other than just lean all the way in.
Yeah, exactly. And so how do you begin to move through that grief? What did you find in terms of practices, teachings? What really supported you in slowly moving through that grief?
I listen to a lot of podcasts, and so I actually listen to a lot of resources around just other people's experience of grief. I very much I surrendered, I guess, and I suppose I struggled a lot more when I lost my mum to surrender than I did this time, because I think I obviously had learned from before. But I think those early stages are, it is an education thing to educate yourself about grief, which is part of obviously why we're having this conversation. So familiarize yourself with what grief is and what it isn't. And just really listen. And then in terms of, those beginning stages of healing, it's really being super clear on your needs. Like what are it's, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It's what are the basic, it almost like it brings it right back down to the level of, am I getting enough sleep? Am I eating okay? Am I my sleep started to falter, then my appetite went. I was, kind of not drinking as much water as I should have been. I was isolating myself. So I began to see all of this play out of, actually, I'm more anxious during the day because I haven't slept. So it kind of made everything worse. And that's where it becomes a vicious cycle, which puts you even further down in your pit of shit. So I think upon recognizing that, I reached out to my doctor. I did get some sleeping pills just to help me. I mean, they obviously give you a very short course just to kind of make sure you get the rest you need so that you can function. And then I just slowly it's almost like the rubble of who I was, slowly, piece by piece, kind of going, right, I need help with sleep. Right, I need to, haven't been out for 2 days. Okay, I just need to go and walk and just 5 minutes round near where I live. I just need to get some fresh air. I know I'll feel better. I'm going to reach out to somebody to talk to them. I'm going to make myself some comfort food. And it might be something that evokes something that I had when I was a child. But I'm just going to focus on the basics. So I think when you're very early on, the basics. And I had some lovely, very, very kind people around me that would kind of deliver food into me. And I know we spoke on the last conversation for people that are knowing somebody else that's going through grieving, acts of service like that to actually drop over, could be some food, could be a face mask, could be some bubble bath, could be any of those things. It's the thought behind that I'm thinking of you and that I want you to know that I'm here. But yeah, certainly the fundamentals, I would say the foundational layer of putting yourself back together again, that should never be underestimated.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate starting with those fundamentals because those basics, they're at the bottom of the hierarchy of needs for a reason. They set that foundation. If you're not getting proper sleep, nothing is going to work well. Nope. Doesn't matter how much you think that you are a hero or a shero or any kind of ro, that you are somebody who can function without lack of sleep. That's bullshit. So let's dispose of that thought process from the gate, especially when you're grieving, because grief is exhausting. So you need to get your sleep. And I love that you went and saw a doctor and got some support with sleeping pills to help you do that, because sometimes we do need that bridge when there's so much going on. We need to look at other therapeutic ways for us to get some good quality sleep so that you can get up and feel like going to walk around the block, getting some good food, making some good food, going out and seeing people. So I think that's really wise to start with those foundations. I want to come back to, because I was thinking this morning actually about, we did talk last time about sort of how other people around us don't deal with grief well. And what I was remembering are some things that people said to me after my mom died that are just not helpful. And I'm not really mad at anybody. I don't blame people for saying what they say, because people are so uncomfortable with grief and everybody's doing the best they can with their own resources and background and perspectives on grief, right? So it's not that I was offended by anything that my mom said, but there, in my view, are some very unhelpful things that I would just like for people to consider not saying to people who are in grief, which, by the way, doesn't leave a lot to say. And I think that that's the problem, is that people don't want to not have something to say. And so a lot of times they will just say shit just to fill the space and try and, quote, make you feel better. So the first thing that I remember, a lot of people would say is like, well, your mom's in a better place. Or, well, now your mom can take care of all of us from up there. Which I get, those come from different people's belief systems, and I appreciate and honor your belief systems. Not my belief system is a little bit different. Something like that, or saying something like, well, they lived a good life, or they lived a long life, even though my mom was young, when people's parents pass away at the age of like 80 or 90, a lot of people say, well, they lived a long life. Any comment like that is a dismissal of the current reality, which is that I don't give a shit where they are. I don't give a shit that they lived a long, healthy life. Yeah, let's celebrate them, celebrate their life. And also, can we just pay attention to the fact that right now they're not here with me? I wanted them to live another 50 years. I don't care that they live to 80. So things like that people say just to fill the void, to make themselves feel better because they're not comfortable with your grief. And so they want to try and fix you, manage you, handle your grief. Just honestly, it's better to just say, I don't know what to say. I have nothing to say, because that's the truth of the matter. There is nothing you can say to make somebody feel better. So I mean, I don't want you to feel like you have to call anybody out, but are there things that come to mind that you can say, like, please maybe not say that to somebody who is grieving over the loss of a parent?
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely true. And I probably said it to people in the past because
totally.
I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
And I think most of us are so uncomfortable with silence, or so uncomfortable with other people's discomfort, that we, like you say, you try and fill the gaps with, stuff that's just not helpful. I guess fundamentally, what I would say is, to acknowledge that, God, this must be really hard for you.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you're going through this. Even if it's just like, I can't imagine what you must be feeling right now. It must be really hard. That actually feels like a tonic. I mean, I had someone recently, who I've not known very long, actually, when I was recounting over the few years that I've had, the fact that he kind of just turned around and said, God, that must have been really hard. I'm sorry that you went through that. That felt so nice.
Yep.
So if you want to, that's a tonic right there. If you want to acknowledge that, that you are acknowledging that it's a painful thing. I think for many of us, and it's a trait of most humans, we have this incessant need to fix. And to kind of, and I mean, again, my sister won't mind me saying, I think she, as an older sister, that's her default. And it's funny because we've had lots of conversations and arguments in the past about this, but we will, I'll flag it to her and say, right, before you say anything, I don't need your advice. I don't need you to fix me, to give me ideas of what to do or to tell me what to do. I just want you to be here. That's all. It's like, I think we think we've got to come up with these ornate plans. And I think she felt, she could see I was in such pain that she was in this like, oh, well, what about this? What about this? What about... But what it actually ended up doing was making me feel more deficient. That's what it did, which was the last thing she wanted to do. She was trying to help me, but it made me feel even less of a human, because it was reminding me all of the things that I didn't have capacity for and didn't have energy for.
Yeah.
And
that's
I think
so powerful.
It's, you said it earlier, out of all of the types of tiredness, physical, mental, emotional tiredness is the most exhausting of all. It's the most exhausting of all. And that's where, you need to be able to tend to that part of you that is aching. It is like a physical ache a lot of the time. But yeah, I would say that to acknowledge, but and just be very mindful about, if your inner fixer starts like rearing up, just tell it to.
Yeah. I think the takeaway from that is if you are somebody who is watching somebody else grieve, don't insert yourself into their grieving process. Let them have their grieving process. Now, of course, if you see somebody who is really in need of some therapeutic support or coaching support or whatever it might be, it's not to say like don't try to support somebody in that way if you see somebody really, really, really struggling. But I think for most of us, when we're dealing with grief of a parent or a loved one, we need to feel that it's okay to be in our grief. And so when somebody comes in and tries to take our grief away or fix it for us or point out to us how it's not okay to sit in our grief, that doesn't make it better. It just makes us feel deficient. And so even offering something like, can I just come over and sit with you? We don't have to do anything. We don't even have to talk. Can I just sit with you? Can we just watch a movie? Like that's it. It doesn't have to be some grand gesture.
Yeah. It's the irony is less is more.
Yep.
In both saying and doing. Less. Just do a whole lot less. Just be. Don't do, just be.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the hardest thing that we find as humans, because we're all about the doing.
Mm-hmm.
And grief, in my experience, demands that we be with. And not try and fight our way through, because it just won't have it. It won't have it. And so that's why it's difficult to put it into words, isn't it? But I think that's when you are coming out the other end of it, that actually it teaches you so much about life. Death teaches you so much about life that you end up viewing life in a whole different way. And so it does end up being a gift, hard as it is to believe when you're going through it.
Yep. So tell me how, I know you do breathwork practices and you went through a breathwork training. And of course, we know a lot of coaching practices, teachings that help us. Tell me how the breathwork or your coaching training were instrumental in helping you heal through the grief. Still healing, by the way, not over. So when I say healing through the grief, tell me how you've used those and how they've been supportive for you.
Absolutely. So I actually did my breathwork certification a month after my dad passed. So I'd been dabbling with breathwork for a number of years before that. But because I love to travel and I love to learn, and I saw it as an opportunity just to, be in another location, a bit of a reset, refresh. It ticked a lot of boxes. So I went off to Icaria, a beautiful Greek island. It was out of season, so it wasn't particularly warm, but it's one of the blue zones. So where, the locals, live to, 80 plus to 100, because they live very organically. They, they move a lot, they eat well, they swim in the sea. So my breathwork journey, I think just before I went, what I had come to the conclusion of, and this was my own healing process, but also in lots of experiences I've had with coaching sessions with clients, is that, stress, yes, you could say stress is in the mind, but actually it's more in your body. It's a biological, reaction. And in many respects, grief is a type of stress, or, it brings up stress on the body or in the body. And there would be times, and this is a practice that I did, and I think we touched on it a little bit, but this kind of loving awareness, more meditation. So I would use the breath as an anchor. So I would sit and meditate, and use just a very soft inhale, exhale, 5 counts in, 5 counts out, or sometimes elongating the out breath, which brings everything down into your parasympathetic nervous system. And it just gives that what you're doing is you're telling your body that you're safe in the present moment. It grounds you into safety, because a lot of the time, the way that grief can show itself, it can come out as an anxious kind of feeling where you feel I think the way my sister and I described it is feeling jangly. Like you feel like everything's a bit, nothing's smooth. Everything just knocks against each other. And jangly is the term. I don't even know whether that's a word, but it is now. And so I used to use breath work just to kind of sit and allow and use my breath to anchor. But I would also, and this is probably where it gets a little bit more advanced, is I was very aware that I could rationalize myself out of feeling something. So I think at some level, we believe we can outthink our feelings. I mean, we can't, by the way. I've tried. And so I would use my breath practice and my meditation practice. And I think we mentioned last time, so one of my all-time favorite quotes for meditating is a Pema Chödrön quote, who's a Buddhist teacher. And she said, imagine that you are the whole sky and your thoughts and feelings are just passing weather. So there would be a few times when I'd be feeling jangly, and I would sit and I would have this lovely kind of warm kind of sweater, jumper in the UK, sweater in the US, to feel warm, to feel that sense of safety and security on my body. But then I would kind of open up and say, okay, I'm going to let my emotion move through me. So it was a bizarre thing of being able to just sit and observe what was going on in my body. So observe where I felt jangly and bring some level of compassionate curiosity into, oh, that's interesting. That feels tight, or, oh, that feels strange. And I was just noticing. And then this one time I practiced this huge rush of emotion came up through me, like a kind of volcano, I guess. And it's funny, we express it comes up. So from down there, it comes up through you. And I just allowed myself to fully go for it. And I sobbed like ugly cry, But I didn't hold back. I just allowed it. And then it, like a wave, it peaked and then it fell away. And then I just sat with it, and I had some tissues, but I sat with it. And honestly, I felt a level of bliss afterwards, because I allowed the energy to move, to peak, get to a crescendo, and then it passed. It was expressed. It moved through me, and then it left me feeling a level of peace. And it was quite a profound experience, actually. So yeah, a little bit more advanced, but that's what I was experimenting with at the time.
Maybe advanced, and it's something that is accessible to everyone.
Oh,
that
yeah,
everyone can start working with our breath. And this is, I think, with breath work, with mindfulness meditation, we're talking about similar things, and being able to focus on that anchor into the present moment with the breath, for example, and being able to allow space for those more unpleasant, challenging emotions to arise. I think Pema's visual of the sky, the clouds, is a very powerful one. I hear too of thinking of it like the ocean and waves. We're the ocean, we're not the waves. And yet we often identify with the waves. We often say, I am sad, I am grieving, I am miserable, like whatever it is. And we identify with the wave, when we can kind of remove ourselves from it and think of ourselves as the sky, or think of ourselves as the whole ocean that holds space for those clouds to pass, for those waves to fall and rise, because then the waves crash on the beach and they dissipate like it did with you. So, but we want to be able to create the space to hold all of that.
That's the key.
And understandably, there's fear for people, because they're like, but if I turn toward that heaviness, that sadness, that grief, it's just going to consume me. Like it's going to be the tidal wave or the thunderstorm that comes and just consumes me. And again, recognizing everybody is different. Everybody has their own trauma, their own neurological abilities, things that are happening. I will say, in my experience, that is not the case. We don't get consumed by it by turning toward it. We actually learn to soften around and create space for it so that it doesn't overtake us. Yeah. So I love that you shared that. Is breathwork now something that you do with your clients?
Yes, it is. And I'm actually taking it into corporate spaces as well. Because, you know, it's the quickest way that you can change your state, and it's accessible. So be able to, again, observe. That's the thing we're trying to exercise. With any muscle that you want to make stronger, you have to do the reps. And so the reps is to keep coming back to the observation mode of, oh, that's interesting, that's happening. Oh, well, that's interesting, that appears to be happening right now. So it's a constant observing of your state, and then noticing with the observation, okay, so that's coming up for me. And what I'm very passionate about is equipping people with very simple tools. So I teach kind of the ABC of breathing with people who are just starting out. So the A stands for activation. So when we get up in the morning, you know, that we're activating our energy, you know, the light in our eyes, our body moves. And so we get moving, we're activated. And that's where our stress response is a healthy one, because it gets us up, moving, animated. But sometimes maybe when we're feeling, you know, you wake up feeling tired because maybe you haven't slept properly, or maybe you've got something that's on your mind, there's circular breath. So the A for activation is using circular breath, which is removing the pause at the top and the bottom of the breath. And basically, and you can do it, it's tends to be more mouth breathing, which are only just short bursts. Predominantly we want to breathe through our nose, not our mouth. But just to be able to sit and those prolonged, and when you're taking breaths, breathing in through the belly, through the diaphragm. So the way you can check is that you put your hands like this and your thumbs at the back of your rib cage and your fingers at the front. You should be able to feel an expansion when you breathe in. And then just a letting go on the way out. Many of us breathe up here, which will signal activation, but not in a great way. So it's being able to use that expansive diaphragm that we have that sits below our rib cage to actually feel expansive, and activates our central nervous system to say, right, we're ready, we're active, I'm ready to take on the day. So we can use breathwork practices instead of reaching for caffeine. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love a morning coffee. Yeah, but there you go. But being able to, and this is something, you know, if you're having a sluggish afternoon, this is something you can do. And I've also done a lot of pairing it with movement. So obviously putting your body in certain positions, you can evoke some movement. Even things like dancing, obviously will get you moving, get you more playful, and activate your energy so that it gives you that natural boost. So the A is for activation, and it's circular breathing. The B is for balance. So that's generally box breathing. So made famous by a lot of Navy SEALs before dropping into war zones or, you know, expeditions would breathe in for 4, hold at the top for 4, breathe out for 4, and hold at the bottom for 4. So that basically, in terms of your central nervous system, you are finding the sweet spot between your sympathetic, which is your activation, and your parasympathetic, which is your rest and digest, but really bringing yourself in the center to rebalance your whole system. So again, you're communicating to your central nervous system and your whole body that to come back into homeostasis, to come back into equilibrium. And then finally, the C is a triangle, and C stands for calm. And so your triangular breath is in for 7 counts, out for 8, hold for 4. So what that does is you're elongating your out breath. So you're signaling to your parasympathetic that just to let everything melt and glide, and just, you know, it's a surrendering breath, really. So you can use these throughout the day. You can activated in the morning. Maybe you get overwhelmed at lunch because you haven't got everything done and you're firefighting the whole day. And then towards the evening, maybe you're tired and wired and you can't switch off and find it very difficult to really get into that relaxed state so that you can fall asleep naturally. So the breath for that, I mean, that's just 3 very, very simple practices that I help my clients utilize to, again, go, I'm feeling this. What are my options? What, start with the end in mind. What am I trying to get to and experience? Okay, I can, the breath is your bridge, basically, your bridge.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. And I think those are really, excuse me, really practical breathing explanations, tips that people can use. Is there on your website or any place, do you have any breathwork exercises for folks?
I do. In fact, I've got a free download that talks more in depth about the ABC of breathing. So yes, you can absolutely download that for free.
Okay, awesome. That'll be great. Yeah, I think starting with the breath kind of comes back to the foundations that we talked about in terms of sleep, food, moving your body, really coming back home to yourself, to your breath, and letting your breath, as you said so beautiful. I love thinking of the breath as a bridge, like letting it be a bridge back to yourself, bridge to your healing, a bridge into the world around you, into the present moment. And I think that's such a powerful and overused word. I mean, we hear a lot about, oh, just take a breath. And I think what we miss a lot in today's advertising around the breath is really not just the simplicity of it, but the depth of it, because the breath is always there for you. It's free. And it is really the bridge to a lot of our healing and to a lot of awareness to the present moment. So I think it's a really beautiful invitation to start there. Yeah. Where are you now in your grieving process?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I know obviously when we spoke, I don't know whether I could have done this interview, say 5-6 months ago. I don't think I could have. I feel like I am I'm definitely in the acceptance range. I still, although, have a lot of moments where the emotion will just come up through me. And depending on where I am, I will allow that and I will just let it come through me. Obviously, if I'm in a situation where it's not really conducive to where I am, I'll take a breath and I'll just kind of say, maybe I need to have some quiet time later on. So I'll just recognize that that's come up. But I think with where I am now is I'm seeing a lot of lessons. I'm able to actually see just how much I've grown through my grief, and will continue to grow. It's been a wild ride. I don't know whether we talked about this before, but I think we maybe did. So I'm a big fan of the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel series, for anyone who's watching it. And she plays this stand-up comedian in the 50s. But one of her little memes, she talks about, I want to live a big life. I want to do stuff. I want to live a big life. And I had a friend of mine who's a fellow coach say to me, I want to live the depth and breadth of life. And we joke now because, when she complains about being in a certain place, I remind her, I'm like, well, you did say you wanted to live the depth and breadth of life. So this is it. And I think, we touched on it before. I think, this is where a lot of the ancient teachings come in of, it's darkest before the dawn. Like that's got a whole new meaning to me now. The kintsugi, Japanese art of mending broken pots and using gold to put them back together again and actually show the cracks as features. I see that as a very powerful analogy for grief. In fact, I have dreams of doing like collaborative art therapy grieving sessions with people who are grieving, but with art practitioners, where we actually, you know, kind of create something that symbolizes all of our broken pieces, but actually that they're beautiful and they're not to be ashamed of, they're not to be hidden, and they're not to be kind of, yeah, or brushed away. No, instead it's the beauty of being human is our vulnerability and our fragility. And so yeah, I find that, because I will say that there was a part of my journey when I lost all of my faith. I lost my spirituality, went, where I suddenly questioned it all and went, oh, it's just a load of BS. Like I can't, you know, and I think it's probably is when I was at the epitome of feeling that way, that I was just done feeling that way. But actually, it's almost like you've got to go there to go through it. And I think, you know, back to another quote, right? The cave you fear to enter has the treasure you seek, which is the same to say that the healing or the tonic you're looking for, it's in the wound.
Yeah.
You kind of have to go in it. And I didn't do it alone. I had a lot of people helping me. And I think I touched upon last time we spoke, but it's worth repeating. I had an amazing grief therapist. And I wish I had gone to her sooner. I wish I'd gone to her sooner, because she was amazing at help me processing. I mean, in the short space of time, I think I maybe had 10 sessions with her, maybe. But when I started, I remember saying to her, I feel like I want to crawl out of my own skin. Like that is something I actually said to her, because that's how I was feeling. And I remember thinking, wow, that's quite a visceral, you know, explanation of you feeling a certain way. That's how I felt. I felt like I wanted to crawl out of my own skin. I felt so uncomfortable in my own being. I just wanted it to stop. I wanted the pain to stop. It was excruciating. But over time, the kindness that she showed me and just the allowing me to get it out and to reform it and reshape it was so powerful. And I remember her, it was maybe a few weeks on, her helping me see how far I'd come. My journey, it's like only a matter of weeks ago did you say that to me, and here you are telling me that actually you feel more grounded today. You feel more at peace with yourself. You no longer feel like you want to crawl out of your skin. That is amazing. Because we're so forward looking. We don't often see, oh yeah, I've come so much further than I've given myself credit for.
Yeah. That's such a powerful reminder for folks, because grief can feel like unforeign territory. Yeah. And if you are in unforeign territory, or unforeign, where did I come up with unforeign? Foreign territory.
Hostile territory. It feels like hostile.
I'm like unfamiliar, yes. Like foreign, unfamiliar territory.
Yeah.
That you need a guide to take you through that unfamiliar territory. And that guide can be a therapist, a coach. It can be friends too. And I think that grief is something that requires a certain amount of lived wisdom and training and experience to skillfully help somebody navigate through. So I really appreciate the reminder to seek some professional help. By the way, what were some of the podcasts that you mentioned that you listened to early on about grief?
Oh, yeah. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but I will give you links to them, because there was one lady in particular that's on YouTube, and I watched quite a lot. She had a lovely little, just beautiful seeds, little golden nuggets that I just kind of gave me comfort, gave me information, but gave me comfort. Really powerful. So I'll make sure that I send you those. Yeah. I think I mentioned last time about the grieving brain as well. Yes. So I'll send you a link to that, because again, when we're going through huge emotion, then we can sever the link to this, you know, this bit of kit that we normally use to rationalize everything. When that gets severed, that's when we feel like we're losing our minds. But actually, it's another evolutionary way that our body is protecting itself by saying, no, you don't need this right now. You don't need this. You need to focus on sleep, nutrition, hydration, and movement and connection.
All the survival things. Yeah. Forget about your executive function. We're just in survival mode right now. So yeah, if you could send me those links, I'll put them in the show notes. And one podcast I want to give a shout out to, oh, I cannot remember her name, but the name of the podcast is called Grief is a Sneaky Bitch. Fabulous. I believe she's a therapist or counselor around grief, and her podcasts have been very profound for me. So we'll include a bunch of resources in the show notes. And just as a reminder, I know we mentioned it last time, but remind folks where they can find you, your website, social media.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I am at AuthenticActionCoaching.com. That's my email. That's my website rather. I'm Authentic Action Coach on Instagram, Facebook. I have a YouTube channel. I'm restarting my podcast. So Michelle, you're going to have to, I've decided. So How Change Changes You, which looks at transition and going through a lot of life changes. So that's getting restarted. One of the reasons I stopped was due to my grieving, right? I had to let go of things that I couldn't have capacity to continue with. So that's being resurrected.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah. So yes, those are all the main places. I'm on LinkedIn as well. But yes, very, very passionate about combining mindset work with breath work to help people navigate a lot of change and eradicate burnout. I mean, a lot of my, story has been around grief and burnout in different guises professionally. So that's definitely part of my mission, to educate people and to give people the simple tools to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, because that will happen with unhealed grief. Burnout is bound to happen. So I love that you are connecting those dots. I want to take you through, I want to end on a high note because we've talked about some kind of heavy stuff. And last time I did not do the lightning round with you.
Oh, yeah.
I forgot to pull it up. So I hope I remember the questions. I'm going to do the best I can off the top of my head. So we'll do our GenX lightning round. So tell me your fondest GenX childhood memory.
Oh, yeah. My fondest GenX memory. Yeah, I forgot to prep for this myself, so I'm going to really pull it. I'm going to really pull it down now. What's coming up for me is, I used to be quite an indie kid. So I used to have Dr. Martin boots, which are back in kind of now.
I love that you said Dr. Martin. We say
Doc
Martin here.
Yeah.
You're so proper. They're Dr. Martin.
Dr. Martin. So proper. Yeah, Doc Martin boots. And yeah, just the whole indie scene, the whole grunge, Nirvana. I had, Kurt Cobain posters that used to piss my mum off because obviously he wasn't the happiest of characters, was he? But my word, was he hot. So yeah, I think that period of grunge and used to go out all of the time and just dance, and obviously over here in the UK shortly after that was kind of the whole Britpop kind of thing with Blur and Oasis. So that was definitely kind of part of my teenage years, I would say.
Yeah. And I'm thinking New Order was probably on the top of your list too, given that one of your recent Instagram videos was doing the what is that? The floss to the New Order song. I invite people to check that out on Instagram. It's pretty entertaining. What was your favorite, or is your favorite, Gen X era word or phrase?
Oh, I remember snazzy being a thing. I remember that word actually being a thing. Snazzy. That's snazzy.
I'm thinking that might be a British Gen X thing. It certainly was not a Nebraska Gen X thing. I think if I'd said snazzy in Nebraska.
It's very short-lived. I mean, there might be some British people listening going, snazzy? What the hell is she talking about? But that again, that just came in there.
Yep. Love it. Go with what comes up.
Short-lived thing. But yeah. Yep.
Snazzy. Yeah. All right. If you had to pick a Gen X era theme song for your life, what would it be?
think we talked about this. So two came up. No, this is difficult.
You can name them both.
I was gonna say, I mean, one of the ones that I love is Black Box, Ride on Time.
What is that? Black Box Right on Time.
I can't sing it.
I'm horrible with song titles. Oh, come on.
I've also got it's a similar song, but I've got the power.
Yes. Yep. Snap.
Yes. So I still to this day love that song.
Yeah.
So I've got the power by Snap is definitely there. But the other ones that came up with a bit of a comedy one was Creep, Radiohead, and just the particular lyric that says, "You do it to yourself, you do, and that's what really hurts."
Yeah.
So
yep.
That's it's almost like a coaching joke, really.
Yeah, I love that. I'm gonna have to remember that phrase because that's true. What would be your biggest piece of advice for Gen Xers going through the transition of grieving?
If I could give you the number one piece of advice is to be more compassionate with yourself. It sounds like such a simple thing, but it's the hardest thing because we are the most hard on ourselves. And whether that is because you were brought up by your bootstraps and you think that being vulnerable is weakness, Michelle and I are here to tell you that that is bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could write a prescription for everybody, it would be for them to be more compassionate with themselves.
Yeah.
Without doubt.
1,000 milligram dose of compassion for yourself
Absolutely.
Every day. Into the vein. Shot. Like
yeah, straight in there. Definitely. Intravenous.
And hot dancing men on Instagram is a good way to show yourself compassion too, which Christina and I we share a lot of videos back and forth.
Jason Momoa, if you're listening.
I know, right?
Michelle and I are available.
And there's like some shirtless cowboy videos that we've been dancing to Beyonce's song "The Saint Texas," which are lovely to watch.
They are yes, they're very lovely.
That's a good way to show yourself some compassion. And last one, what are you most proud of being a Gen Xer?
Oh, nice. What am I most proud of? What comes up is the way I've navigated change. I think my perseverance. I've definitely been through my fair share of pits of shit. But it's one thing it's proven to me is that it is darkest before the dawn, but the dawn does always come. And actually, because you've been to darker places, I can say now that I see so much more beauty in the simplest of things, more so than I ever did when I was younger. So that for me is the gift of grief. It is brutal, but it is beautiful. So yeah, I guess my perseverance would be something I'm very proud of.
That's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much, my love. I'm so deeply grateful for you sharing your journey again, sharing the wisdom that you've learned in your experience, because I know it's going to help some other people going through grief. I encourage folks to reach out to Christina if anything that she said has landed for you, or you're curious more about doing some of the breath work and healing work that she's been doing. So thank you for being a part of helping people heal their way through this grief.
I love that. Thank you. I've loved our conversation. And if it's just helped one person, then it's absolutely worth it, because we're all on this journey together. We're all just walking ourselves home, aren't we? So
beautiful. All right. Thank you, Christina. Thank you. All right. That conversation felt for me like a warm blanket, like some salve to some of the wounds I have around the loss of my mom, even the loss of my grandparents. Because if you didn't pick this up from our last two episodes, grief never ends. It's something that can be re-triggered, kind of excavated in the future through another grief journey that we might be going on. And so the important takeaway from this episode is to be able to recognize the grief that you are experiencing around losing a parent, to know that it's normal, It's part of the human experience, and that it's okay for you to take the time that you need to tend to yourself and to your grief, to return to some of those very fundamental human needs like getting rest, eating well, going out for walks, and to maybe start leaning into how your breath can help heal you through this grief. Returning home to the powerful practice of connecting to the breath can be a fundamental step in starting to move through your grief journey. So if you are a Gen Xer who is navigating the loss of a parent, it doesn't matter how long ago that happened or how recently, please know that you don't have to do it alone. Remember to reach out for support. Remember that it's important for you to give your grief time and space. As always, reach out to me if you have any reflections or questions about this episode. I'm here to support you on whatever transition you're making, including our transitions through grief. And if you can please remember to like, share, rate the podcast, it goes a long way to helping me spread the word of how Gen Xers can start to make these shifts in our lives. So until next time, stay gold, Gen Xers.